Hi, and welcome to another Harry's Hobbies video. And I'm still working on the Yamaha XV1000 Virago. And this video will cover steps 7, 8, and 9. And there's multiple sub-assemblies, actually 2 sub-assemblies that go along with this, as well as the standard. Now, the first thing that I work on, as you can see in step 7, is the swing arm. And this consists of 3 parts. 2 pieces that are will be shortly painted, and 1 chrome part. And that chrome part is right here. And again, we trim up the little mold marks off the tree itself. And then this fits on the swing arm like so. Now you want to make sure this piece had to go in first, and I wanted to make sure that the glue was good and dry before I did anything. And this has got a little nib that fits in a small little slot on the chrome piece, right in there like so. And again, I'm using the Tamiya very thin liquid cement for this. And we get, the part goes in. Move those instructions out of the way so that you guys can see the... And I take the cement, put a nice little droplet in there. And then we put the part on. And if you notice, I haven't painted this yet because this is actually going to match the color of the frame. So I want to let this sit in here for a minute and let that dry. Now, the color of the frame that I used was the gunmetal. And I'm not going to paint that just yet. We're going to go on to another small sub-assembly, because this is going to have the wheels. The first wheel goes on. And there's 2 wheels, obviously, for this motorcycle. And the other one is still on the tree, as you can see here. But I want them the same color, and I want them to match. So I paint them at the same time. And that's going to be the aluminum. I'm going to paint the rear wheel first, since I want it to dry obviously first, because I'm going to be using this one in this particular instance. And the fortunate thing about using the brush for this is the brush strokes won't be that visible due to the fact that it's a small part. It'll be covered up by quite a bit of other things like the swing arm and the fender. And I'll be adding a couple other nice little details before the assembly to the wheel itself. And you'll see that shortly after this paint gets set up. I may have to pause this video and come back later after I get this painted, because the paint may not set up in time to continue on. And I do like to let the paint get good and dry before moving on, for obvious reasons, so you don't get a bunch of paint smears and get paint spread over other parts of the model. And I've got the rear one covered with a good coat of aluminum. And I'm going to come over and do the front. Simply because I've already got the brush with paint. And since this is going to be the same color, might as well get it painted. And that way it'll be really good and dry before I get to the front forks and the front fender, where this wheel will go. Now what I do like about the Tamiya kits, especially these older ones, is they still have a lot of little details in here, like right here and even on the rear. It's a little hard, very hard to see in the video. They actually have the valve stem coming out of the middle of the part of the wheel itself. You don't see details like that too much. I know it's something that's small and it's not that big of a deal, but it just goes to show some of the quality aspects of the designers that built these and designed the molds and the basic concept of the bike itself. So that front wheel is done. I have the rear wheel sitting off to the side. So we're going to close this up. Put that paint off to the side. And we're going to clean the brush off. And once again, always put the lid back on because you never know when you're going to bump something. Don't want that spilled all over the place. And the next sub-assembly that's on this one is the shock absorbers. And this is, I've always thought this was a nice little detail that was added into the model kits. They actually have springs that are held in place on the pieces themselves. And we're going to get the parts needed for this off the tree. Just use our snips. Get the parts off, and they're just 4 parts, well, 6 parts including the springs. And again, we're trimming off the little piece that's left over from getting it off the sprue. And then we take the spring. It's got a small little slot right here where this piece will actually lock this into place. And that slips on like so. And then we take the small little piece and line it up. And you get that to lock in place. And then you have one shock done. Now I am going to do a small little touch up on either end. And that'll come up here real shortly. Then get enough of that little nib cut off. That slips on like so. And we take our other piece, lock that one into place. And you've got two shocks. Now, what I wanted to show you is I want the shocks to kind of stand out just a little bit. So I've got a gold pen, paint pen. I'm going to get a little bit of paint onto from the pen onto a piece of cardboard. I'm going to take a fine brush and we're going to use that paint and go right around the top and the bottom of the shock. Now I used the brush instead of the ink pen itself, paint pen itself, because I didn't want it to get it too thick to where it's flowing onto the spring. And the mounting pieces. Where it's going to mount to the actual bike itself. We set that out to the side to dry. And once again, we take our paintbrush and get it cleaned out. And now that the glue has had plenty of time to dry on this piece, we're going to take our gunmetal and I'm going to paint the gunmetal onto the piece so that it matches the frame of the bike. And this is an enamel paint. It's Testers. And it doesn't take too long to dry. And we set that off to the side and give that time to dry. And again, take the brush, clean it out. Always put the caps back on. Always, always, always. And I'm going to pause this video here, and I'll come back after this has gotten nice and dry. Yeah, because this is still a little too sticky. So I'm going to give that some time to dry. And because this piece, this particular assembly will be going on the main part of the frame. So that's why I want to let it get dry so I don't smear any of the paint onto the chrome or onto other parts of the frame. So I'll pause here and I'll be back shortly. So after giving ample time for the paint and the extra glue to dry, I'm ready to continue on. And for this, we're going to need the rear tire, which is right here. And we'll need one of these long screws. And then we're going to need a very small screwdriver, which I happen to have a set of right here. And these you can pick up from, and you don't need expensive ones. Just go to a inexpensive hardware store and you can pick those up. And the first thing I'm going to do is take the tire and put it onto the rim. And this is a pretty simple process. You just kind of force it over and get it to seat. And then any little bit of paint that has gotten onto the tire is pretty easy to clean off. And we've got that seated on there pretty nice. And then we have this part will actually slip into here. And it's seems like it's fitting kind of tight, but it does pop in. And it allows the wheel to spin. And I take the axle piece. You want to make sure that of course, you get the shaft on the correct side. And this is where the screw comes into play. And we get this to go through and line up on the other side. And unfortunately it's a flathead screw. It is not a Phillips. So it takes a little bit of work to get this to go in. And it is a little bit finicky. But it does connect in. And you don't want to get it too tight. You still want to make sure that the wheel spins. And the next piece that goes on is our support beam to hold the disc brake in place. And that connects in like so. You kind of have to hold it a little weird when you apply the glue. And again, I'm using the Yamaha extra thin cement. So that it'll flow in onto the scraped chrome parts as well as the frame that holds that in place. And then that won't fully spin the disc brake on the rear. And this is where we come back into the frame. And there are two small chrome pieces that slip in and hold that framework into place. And get those off of the tree. And you want to make sure that you get the little nib from the tree completely off of this piece, because it does need to slip inside a slot that's on the frame. And that kind of slipped off. And then this entire assembly goes into the frame. You line up the holes and take these little chrome parts and they should slide right in. And I forgot to scrape the chrome. But now these are two pieces that you're not going to glue initially, due to the fact that The shock absorbers still need to be added. And if those are glued in place, you're going to have a hard time lining the shocks up if this is solidly glued in place at this time. So you want it to shift just enough to add the shocks on. And actually that's what I'm doing now. And again, scrape a little bit of the plating away. Now there's two different shocks. One goes on the left and one goes on the right. One has a small pin that goes into the slot for the shock. Oh, dang it. Doggone pin came out. Finicky little boogers, aren't they? Then I've got one shock in place, and I'm now going to let some of this glue run into those pins that I put in. As well as onto the shock itself at those connection points. And then the next part of this video, what I'll do is I will be adding the engine to the front after this glue gets good and dry. I don't want to mess with it and start fingering it up right now. So I'll give that a while to dry. And part 3 will be placing the engine into its place in the frame. So that's coming up next. So here I am with part 3 of the steps 7, 8, and 9 of the assembly on the Yamaha XV 1000 Virago. And what I've done is there's some very tiny screws that hold the engine assembly in, and I've got those lined up and ready to go in. But we have to get this piece lined up here, and that actually pops over this setup here. It's a little rough to get in, but I want to make sure that I have the screws tight enough inside that they're not going to slip out while I'm going about doing that. And then I'll come back and I'll tighten these up momentarily. So for now, they're temporarily tightened up a little bit. And we get that to slip right over like so. And again, we take the Tamiya liquid cement and place a little droplet in there. And that'll dry quite nicely. And then I go back to the screws. And we see to it that these are in there tight enough to hold the entire assembly in place. And you have to kind of, sometimes with these screws on the Tamiya kits, they fit right tight. So you have to bear down on them with a little bit of pressure. And I've usually put my finger on the other side. And I've actually had the screwdriver slip off a few times and poke myself in the finger doing so. But as any modeler will tell you, you're going to have accidents. Sometimes they hurt, sometimes they're not so bad. Now after I have those in there, what I like to do is just for a little extra added protection, I just add a little bit of glue and it'll flow in, and it won't really bond with the screws that well, but it's enough to just kind of hold them in place because you're not going to be tweaking with those much anyway. So from this point, the next step is going to be the exhaust kit, or module, or whatever you'd like to call it. And that steps 10 and 11. And then after that, we'll get into the body and a lot more of the detail. There's a lot of detail that goes into these little boogers, so that's upcoming. And as usual, following this video will be a short slideshow showing the work that has been done thus far. And I hope you enjoyed this. And once again, thanks for watching.